In this lecture, I'm covering Sociology of Family, and we're going to define some basic concepts in the study of family and go over some terms that we have with regard to the types of families that we have. So a family is a group of people who are related by blood, marriage, adoption, or kinship. Most of you know what I mean when I say blood or marriage or adoption. What you might not be familiar with is this term kinship. Kinship is a close connection, people who you feel a sense of closeness to. They may not be biologically related to you. They may not be related to you by marriage. However, they are people who you treat as if they are part of your family. So maybe you have someone who you call your cousin or your aunt. It's not really your biological cousin or your biological aunt, but maybe it's your mother's best friend or someone you've known your entire life who gets invited to all of the family functions. Those people are kin as well as the people who are related by blood, marriage, and adoption. Families are not the same as households. So families are related by blood, marriage, adoption, or kinship. Households are people who share the same dwelling, the same residence, whether it's an apartment or a house or a condominium or whatever it might be. So again, households are people living in the same place. Families are related by blood, marriage, or adoption. Not all of your family is going to be in your household, right? I'm a 45-year-old woman and my mom and dad do not live with me at this time and may never live with me again unless I have to do some sort of caregiving type of responsibility for them. That doesn't mean they're not my parents because they don't live with me, right? We have households also that are not family households. You may have a roommate who you live with, or you might live with your fraternity brothers or something like that. So a household and a family are distinct things. They're similar, they overlap in some ways. Many households are family households, but there are also non-family households, and there are families who do not share households with each other. The other thing that's a big part of this chapter is a bunch of vocabulary words. Let's start out with the difference between a nuclear family and an extended family. A nuclear family is going to be parents and their children. That's your nuclear family. Your extended family is everyone outside of that. Cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, second cousins. Those people are part of your extended family. In the United States and in Europe, the dominant family living situation, the dominant type of family household, is going to be a nuclear family household with parents and children sharing a common residence. In many other parts of the world, the extended family household is much more common. So it's a very Euro-American and European way of living when you have nuclear family households. If you were to go to Asia or Latin America or Africa, you would see households that may have cousins or grandparents or aunts or uncles all kind of living in the same place, in the same household, or sometimes in certain places they're sort of like neighborhoods. They call them compounds in West Africa where all the different family members live in close proximity to each other, sometimes sharing the same household as well. So we are, in this culture, particularly Euro-Americans, people who descend from Europeans, are predominantly nuclear family oriented when it comes to our households. This chapter also includes a bunch of vocabulary words, and one of the best ways for you to remember all these 85,000 vocabulary words is to understand the prefixes and suffixes of them. If anything has M-A-T, that means woman. If anything has P-A-T, that means man, or sometimes M-A-T means mother, and P-A-T means father. If it says gammy on the end of it, G-A-M-Y, that means marriage. If it says lineal, it means your lineage. How do you trace your family line? So let's go through the first set of terms that we have for how you trace your ancestry. If you live in a patrilineal culture, you trace your ancestry through your father, patra, male, lineal, lineage. If you live in a matrilineal culture, you're going to trace your ancestry through your mother's side. If you live in a bilineal or bilateral society, you will trace your ancestry from both sides. So in the United States, would you say that we are patrilineal, matrilineal, or bilateral? You should think about that carefully, and we can discuss that further at a later time. Another set of terms that we have are terms with relationship to the number of marital partners that we're allowed to have. So if you live in a culture that has monogamy, mono is one, gamy is marriage, you are allowed to marry one person at a time. Nowadays we often have what's called serial monogamy, where you may marry more than one person over your lifetime but never be married to more than one person at a time. So again, monogamy allows you to be married to one person. Polygamy is when you can marry more than one person, and there are different types of polygamy. Polyandry occurs when one woman can marry multiple men, and polygyny, with a G-Y-N-Y on the end, occurs when one man can marry more than one woman. The way to remember that, by the way, is poly means many. G-Y-N-Y is like women go to the gynecologist, many women. Andro means male, by the way, if you didn't know that. So polyandry, many males. Polygyny, many women. So if one man has multiple wives, it's polygyny. If one woman has multiple husbands, it's polyandry. Yes, someone's probably already thinking this. Polyandry is very rare. It's not very common for women to have multiple husbands. You'd have two men asking you for sex and cleaning the house and demanding that you know where their wallet is. And that would probably not work out very well in many societies, particularly if they are patriarchal societies, right, or male-dominated societies. The power distribution is also part of marriage. We'll talk about this, or we talked about this in gender. If a society is patriarchal, it's male-dominated. If it's matriarchal, it's female-dominated. Another set of terms we have are the terms that we have regarding leaving the nest and launching your children out into the world. In a culture that is like ours, we emphasize when you are young your nuclear family as your family of origin or your family of orientation. So the family that you're born in, that you're raised in, that you grow up with, that's your family of origin, your family of orientation. When you get older and you create a family on your own and you have children and you have a spouse, that's going to be your family of procreation. Notice a bias in the terminology there. The assumption is that you will get married and procreate. Obviously, not everyone does that, but I want you to be conscientious about how your role is different in your family of orientation versus your family of procreation. So your responsibilities are different. And sometimes maybe those responsibilities might conflict with each other. So that's another thing to think about. Another term that we see is this boomerang effect. If you think about a boomerang, you throw it out, and what happens? It comes back to you. And so in the boomerang effect, what we see is parents launching their children out into the world, and then their children end up back with them. Maybe they come back from college, they don't have a place to live, they move in with mom and dad. They get a divorce, they can't afford to live on their own. They have a disabling injury or some kind of financial crisis, they lose their job. If they come back to live with their parents, that would be the boomerang effect. Now, I used to joke with my students and tell them that their generation was notorious for participating in this boomerang effect. But some of my students more recently have suggested to me, and I actually think they're correct, that this is not the boomerang generation, that folks of this generation don't move out in the first place. And that's becoming truer and truer. Young people are living with their parents longer and longer and longer in the U.S. It's no longer common to be launched out on your own when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. Many people live with their parents longer and longer, and that has some things to do with education and financial instability. Millennials and this Gen Z generation are facing a lot of economic instability. They're expected to get more education. I also think on the more negative side that some of it has to do with the style of parenting. Parents don't raise their young people to be as independent as they used to. We're coddling people a little more and giving them a lot longer to grow up. And that probably has created this other effect, which we call actually failure to launch. So the boomerang effect, you launch and you come back. With failure to launch, you just never leave in the first place. It's not a huge problem in your late teens and early 20s, but it starts to create problems when you're 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 years old and you're still with your parents. And so we are very concerned about what that trend means for the future. especially for the parents, they can't save for their retirement, they're supporting adult children. And then for the adult children, they're not taking on what we consider traditional adult responsibilities at that time. Another set of terms that you're going to see are the terms we have for where newly married families live. If you live in a matrilocal culture, you get married and you move in with the woman's family. In a patrilocal culture, you get married and move in with the man's family. In a bilocal culture, you could get married and move in with either one, the man's or the woman's family. Or bilocal could also mean you live separately in two different locations. You sometimes see that with like celebrity couples or somebody like that who can afford to have two homes. Neolocal is the dominant norm in this culture. Neo means new. So in a neolocal marriage, you would get married and move to your own new location. That norm's very predominant. You wouldn't tell your friend in this culture, I'm getting married and moving in with my mama. They would view that negatively because the norm of neolocality is very, very strong.